The morning sun pressed against Marcus Webb's back like a warm hand, but it brought no comfort. He stood at the edge of a manicured driveway that seemed to stretch forever, leading to a mansion that looked like it had been plucked from a dream and dropped into the wealthiest neighborhood in Portland. His son's backpack hung heavy on his shoulders, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. Inside were the last 3 granola bars they owned, a water bottle he'd refilled at a gas station, and a worn copy of Where the Wild Things Are that Tommy read every night before bed. Marcus was a little person, 3 feet 9 inches of quiet dignity wrapped in faded jeans and a shirt that had seen better days. His hands were calloused from years of odd jobs, his face weathered but kind, with eyes that held both exhaustion and an unshakable gentleness. At 38, he'd learned to navigate a world that wasn't built for him, but lately that world had become impossibly heavy. The eviction notice had come 3 days ago. The restaurant where he'd worked as a dishwasher for 2 years had closed without warning, and with it went the fragile stability he'd built for Tommy. His 5-year-old son, the light of his entire existence, didn't know yet that they'd be sleeping in their 15-year-old Honda tonight. Marcus had told him they were going on an adventure, camping under the stars. Tommy's excitement had broken his heart into pieces so small he wasn't sure they'd ever fit back together. He'd spent the morning driving through neighborhoods like this one, knocking on doors, offering to mow lawns, trim hedges, wash cars, anything for enough money to buy dinner and maybe, just maybe, scrape together enough for a weekly motel room while he figured out their next move. Most doors never opened. Some opened only to close quickly, the residents uncomfortable with his presence, as if poverty and desperation were contagious. One woman had actually called him cute, in a tone that made his skin crawl, then shooed him away like a stray dog. But this house was different. It stood alone on 3 acres, surrounded by gardens that looked like they belonged in a magazine. The lawn was already pristine, but Marcus had noticed a small patch near the back that seemed overgrown. Wild. It was a reach, a desperate one, but he was out of options. He walked up the driveway, each step feeling like a small surrender. The doorbell echoed somewhere deep inside the house, and for a long moment, there was nothing but silence and the distant sound of birds. Marcus was about to turn away when he heard footsteps. Confident, quick, the click of expensive shoes on marble. The door opened and the world tilted. Victoria. She stood there in tailored black slacks and a cream silk blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a way that showed off the elegant lines of her face. She was 36 now, but she looked exactly as he remembered from 15 years ago, beautiful in a way that had always seemed almost unreal to him, like something he'd imagined rather than actually touched. But it was her eyes that hit him hardest, those same green eyes that had once looked at him with something he'd believed was love. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Her face went through a series of expressions: shock, recognition, something that might have been pain, then a careful blankness that settled over her features like a mask. "Marcus," she said, and his name in her mouth sounded like a foreign word, something from another life entirely. "Victoria." His voice came out smaller than he'd intended, and he hated himself for it. He straightened his shoulders, lifted his chin. I didn't know this was your house. I'm sorry to bother you. I'll go." "Wait." She stepped forward, one hand on the door frame, and he could see her mind working, processing. "What are you doing here?" The question hung between them, loaded with 15 years of silence. Marcus felt his face grow hot. Pride told him to walk away, but the image of Tommy's face, the trust in his son's eyes when he'd promised everything would be okay, kept him rooted to the spot. "I'm offering to do yard work," he said quietly. "Mowing, trimming, whatever you need. I noticed the back area looks like it could use some attention. I'll work for food, for my son and me. We just need a meal, maybe some groceries if you're willing." He watched something flicker across her face. Pity? Discomfort? He couldn't tell, and that uncertainty burned worse than outright rejection would have. "You have a son?" Her voice was softer now, and that somehow made everything worse. "Tommy. He's 5. He's waiting in the car." Marcus gestured vaguely toward the street where his battered Honda sat like a monument to everything he'd failed to become. Victoria's hand went to her throat, a gesture he remembered from when she was nervous or upset. She looked past him toward the car, then back at his face, and for a moment he saw the girl she'd been at 21, the art student who'd sat next to him in the community college cafeteria and started a conversation about the book he was reading. The girl who'd kissed him in the rain after their third date and whispered that she'd never felt this way before. The girl who'd disappeared from his life 2 months later with nothing but a note that said, "I'm sorry. This isn't what I want." "Come in," she said abruptly. "Both of you. I'll make lunch." Marcus's pride screamed at him to refuse, but Tommy's hunger was louder. He nodded once, then walked back to the car on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Tommy was dozing in his booster seat, his small face peaceful, one hand clutching the stuffed elephant that had been his companion since birth. Marcus's heart clenched. His son looked so small, so vulnerable, so trusting that his daddy would fix everything. The weight of that trust was crushing. "Hey, buddy," Marcus said softly, unbuckling him. "We're going to have lunch with a nice lady. Remember your manners, okay?" Tommy's eyes opened, still heavy with sleep. "Is she going to give us food, Daddy?" The simple directness of the question was a knife to Marcus's chest. "Yeah, sweetheart, she is." Victoria was waiting in the doorway when they approached. Marcus watched her take in Tommy, his tousled dark hair, his bright eyes, the way he held his elephant close. Something in her expression cracked just slightly, and Marcus felt a surge of protective anger. They didn't need her pity. They didn't need anything but the food she'd offered, and then they'd be gone. The house was even more impressive inside, all soaring ceilings and tasteful artwork, the kind of place that whispered money in every carefully chosen detail. Tommy's eyes went wide, and he pressed closer to Marcus's side. "This is like a castle, Daddy," he whispered. "Mind your manners," Marcus reminded him gently, but his own discomfort was a living thing in his chest. This world, Victoria's world, was so far removed from his own that it felt like stepping onto another planet. Victoria led them to a kitchen that was bigger than the entire apartment Marcus had just lost. Marble countertops, professional appliances, windows that looked out onto a garden that seemed to go on forever. She moved through the space with the ease of someone who belonged there, pulling out ingredients, her movements practiced and efficient. "Sit," she said, gesturing to a breakfast nook that overlooked the yard. "Please." They sat. Tommy swung his legs, not quite reaching the floor, his elephant clutched in his lap. Marcus felt the distance between his old life and this moment like a physical thing, a chasm he couldn't cross. "What's your name?" Victoria asked Tommy as she started pulling out bread, deli meat, cheese. "Tommy Webb." His voice was small, but polite. "I'm 5. This is Mr. Trumpets." He held up his elephant. "Hello, Mr. Trumpets." Victoria's smile was genuine, and Marcus saw the ghost of the girl he'd known. "I'm Victoria. It's nice to meet you both." She made sandwiches with quick efficiency, adding chips and fruit, pouring milk for Tommy and water for Marcus. She set the plates down in front of them, and Marcus had to swallow hard against the sudden tightness in his throat. It was just lunch, just sandwiches, but the kindness of it, the simple act of being fed, threatened to undo him completely. "Thank you," he said quietly. "We appreciate it." Tommy didn't wait for more invitation. He grabbed his sandwich with both hands and took a huge bite, and the contentment on his face was both beautiful and heartbreaking. How long had it been since his son had eaten without Marcus worrying about where the next meal would come from? Victoria sat down across from them with her own sandwich, but Marcus noticed she barely touched it. She watched them eat with an expression he couldn't quite read, and the silence stretched out, heavy with all the things they weren't saying. "So," she said finally, "tell me what happened. How did you end up here, at my door?" The question was gentle, but it still felt like an invasion. Marcus set down his sandwich, his appetite suddenly gone despite the hollow ache in his stomach. "Life happened," he said carefully, aware of Tommy beside him. "Lost my job. Lost our apartment. Just trying to figure out the next step. And you're alone?" She glanced at Tommy. His mother left when he was 6 months old. The words came out flat, emotionless, but the truth behind them was anything but. She couldn't handle it. Said she didn't sign up to raise a kid by herself while I worked 3 jobs just to keep us afloat. Victoria's face did something complicated. I'm sorry. Don't be. Marcus lifted his chin. Tommy's the best thing that ever happened to me. I wouldn't trade him for anything. I can see that. Her voice was soft. He's beautiful, Marcus. He's lucky to have you. The words should have been comforting, but they weren't. They just highlighted the distance between them, between the life she lived in this mansion and the life he lived in his car. Tommy finished his sandwich and looked up at Victoria with those big, trusting eyes that saw the good in everyone. Do you have a family, Miss Victoria? She hesitated, and in that hesitation, Marcus saw pain flash across her face. No, she said quietly. It's just me. That's sad. Tommy's voice was matter-of-fact, the brutal honesty of childhood on full display. Everyone should have a family. Right, Daddy? Right, buddy. Marcus ruffled his son's hair, then stood. We should get going. Thank you for lunch. If you still want the yard work done, I'm happy to take care of it. Otherwise, we'll get out of your way. Marcus. Victoria stood too, and there was something urgent in her voice. Wait. Can we talk? Just for a minute. Tommy, would you like to watch some cartoons while your dad and I step outside? Tommy's eyes lit up. Marcus wanted to refuse, wanted to grab his son and leave this house and everything it represented. But he was tired, so tired, and maybe Victoria deserved a chance to say whatever she needed to say. He nodded. She set Tommy up in a living room that probably cost more than Marcus had made in the last 5 years, put on a children's show, and then led Marcus out to a terrace that overlooked the gardens. The afternoon sun was warm, the air sweet with the smell of flowers, and the contrast between the beauty of this place and the ugliness of his situation made Marcus want to scream. I never thought I'd see you again, Victoria said, and her voice was rough with emotion. After I left, I thought you'd be better off. I thought I was doing the right thing. Marcus turned to look at her, and 15 years of hurt and confusion rose up in his chest like a wave. The right thing would have been to talk to me, to tell me why you were leaving instead of just disappearing with a note that explained nothing. I know. She wrapped her arms around herself, and for the first time, Marcus saw past the polished exterior to the uncertainty beneath. I was young and stupid and scared. Scared of what? The question burst out of him, sharp and bitter. Scared of me? Of what people would say? I thought you loved me, Victoria. I thought we were building something. I did love you. Her eyes were bright with tears. That's why I left. Because my family, God, Marcus, my family lost their minds when they found out about you. My father threatened to cut me off, to disown me. He said I was throwing my life away, that people would laugh at me, that I'd never be taken seriously with a... She stopped, her face crumpling. I can't even say it. The things he said about you, about us, they were horrible. Marcus felt like he'd been punched. So you chose them. You chose money and respectability over me. I chose survival. Her voice broke. I was 21 years old. I had no money of my own, no job, no way to support myself. I was in school on my father's dime, living in an apartment he paid for. He made it clear that if I stayed with you, I'd be completely cut off. And I was a coward, Marcus. I was weak and I ran, and I've regretted it every single day since. The words hung in the air between them, and Marcus didn't know what to do with them. Part of him wanted to forgive her, to understand that she'd been young and pressured and afraid. But another part, the part that had spent 15 years wondering what he'd done wrong, wondering if he was worthy of love at all, that part was still bleeding. And now? He asked quietly. What about now? You're clearly successful. This house, your life. You don't need them anymore. So what's your excuse now? Victoria's face was wet with tears. There is no excuse. I built this life brick by brick, thinking that if I just worked hard enough, achieved enough, proved myself enough, it would fill the hole I'd made when I walked away from you. But it didn't. It never did. I've thought about you constantly, wondered where you were, if you were happy, if you'd forgiven me. And now you're here, and you're struggling, and it's like the universe is showing me exactly how badly I failed. I don't need your guilt, Marcus said, but his voice was gentler now. And I don't need your pity. I came here because I needed to feed my son, not to reopen old wounds. What do you need? Victoria stepped closer, her voice urgent. Tell me, please, let me help. Pride warred with desperation in Marcus's chest. He thought about Tommy, about the car they'd be sleeping in tonight, about the uncertain future that stretched out before them like a dark road with no end. I need a job, he said finally. I need stability for Tommy. His voice cracked. I need to be able to provide for my son. That's all I've ever wanted. To give him a good life, to show him that his dad is someone worth looking up to. But I can't even keep a roof over his head. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could see her thinking, processing. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and determined. Stay here. Marcus's head snapped up. What? Stay here, in the guest house. She gestured toward a smaller building he hadn't noticed before, tucked among the trees at the edge of the property. It's fully furnished, has 2 bedrooms. It's just sitting empty. You and Tommy can stay there while you get back on your feet. I can't, Marcus started, but she cut him off. Yes, you can. And before you let your pride get in the way, think about Tommy. Think about giving him a safe place to sleep, regular meals, stability, while you job hunt. You can work for me, maintain the grounds, help with maintenance around the property. I'll pay you a fair wage. This doesn't have to be charity, Marcus. It can be a job, a fresh start. Marcus felt like the ground was shifting under his feet. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to walk away, to protect himself from the woman who'd already broken his heart once. But then he thought about Tommy's face when he'd promised him an adventure, the way his son had clutched Mr. Trumpets and trusted that his daddy would take care of everything. Why would you do this? His voice was barely above a whisper. After everything. Victoria's eyes were impossibly sad. Because I owe you. Because I was wrong 15 years ago, and I can't change that. But maybe I can do something right now. Because that little boy in there deserves better than sleeping in a car. And you deserve a chance to catch your breath and rebuild. And because... She took a shaky breath. Because maybe this is the universe giving me a chance to not be a coward anymore. Marcus closed his eyes. The sun was warm on his face, and he could hear birds singing in the garden, and somewhere inside that enormous house his son was laughing at cartoons, safe and fed and happy. He thought about all the doors that had closed in his face, all the people who'd looked at him with pity or disgust or uncomfortable charity. And then he thought about Victoria at 21, afraid and pressured and making the wrong choice. He thought about himself at 23, heartbroken and confused, but still moving forward because that's what you did when life knocked you down. 1 month, he said finally. We'll stay 1 month. I'll work for you, and you'll pay me fair wages. I want a contract, everything official. And at the end of the month, if I haven't found something else, we'll figure it out. But this isn't. We're not. I know. Victoria's voice was soft. This is just help. Nothing more than what any decent person would offer. But they both knew it was more than that. It was a second chance. Not for romance, not for the past, but for something neither of them could quite name yet. The first week was awkward. Marcus threw himself into the work with a fierce determination, mowing the expansive lawns, trimming hedges, repairing a broken fence, cleaning out gutters. The guest house was more comfortable than anywhere he'd lived in years. 2 bedrooms with actual beds, a small kitchen, a bathroom with hot water that didn't run out. Tommy was thriving, his laughter echoing through the space as he explored their new temporary home. Victoria kept her distance, professional and polite. She'd leave lists of tasks, provide the tools he needed, occasionally check in to make sure they had everything. But there was a careful boundary between them, an invisible line neither of them crossed, until the night Tommy got sick. It started with a cough, then a fever that spiked so fast it terrified Marcus. He'd been through childhood illnesses before, but this felt different. Tommy was burning up, crying that his throat hurt, that he couldn't breathe right. Marcus didn't have insurance. He'd been calculating in his head how much an urgent care visit would cost when there was a knock at the door. Victoria stood there in pajamas and a robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. "I heard him crying," she said. "Is he okay?" "Fever," Marcus said shortly, his worry making him brusque. "I'm handling it." But even as he said it, Tommy let out a particularly pitiful cry, and something in Victoria's face shifted. "Let me help, please." She swept into the guest house with the confidence of someone used to taking charge. She pressed her hand to Tommy's forehead, looked at his throat, asked questions about his symptoms. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call. "Dr. Richardson, it's Victoria Chen. I'm sorry to call so late, but I have a 5-year-old with a high fever and throat pain. Can you come to the house?" "Yes, I know it's 10 o'clock. I'll pay triple your usual rate. Thank you." She hung up and looked at Marcus. "My doctor. He makes house calls for emergencies. He'll be here in 20 minutes. "I can't afford," Marcus started, but she shook her head. "Consider it part of your benefits package. Every employee of mine has health coverage. We just haven't done the paperwork yet." It was a lie, and they both knew it, but Marcus was too worried about Tommy to argue. He just nodded and went back to his son's side, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead and murmuring reassurances. The doctor confirmed it was strep throat, wrote a prescription for antibiotics, and assured them that Tommy would be feeling better within a day or two. Victoria drove to an all-night pharmacy herself, returning with the medication and popsicles for Tommy's throat. She stayed while Marcus gave Tommy his first dose, helped him settle back into bed, sang him a lullaby in a voice that was surprisingly sweet and clear. And when Tommy finally drifted off to sleep, she and Marcus found themselves sitting in the small living room, exhausted and raw. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly. "I don't know how I would have handled that on my own. You would have figured it out. You always do." Victoria's voice was soft. "You're a good father, Marcus. Anyone can see that. I'm a father who almost let his kid sleep in a car." The words burst out of him, sharp with self-recrimination. "I'm a father who can't afford basic health care or a stable home. Some days I wonder if he'd be better off with someone else, someone who could actually give him the life he deserves." "Don't!" Victoria's voice was fierce. "Don't you dare diminish what you do for him. That little boy in there is happy and loved and secure because of you. He knows his father would move mountains for him. That's worth more than any house or bank account." Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the truth in her eyes. "You really believe that?" "I know it." She was quiet for a moment. "My father had all the money in the world, but I never once felt like he loved me more than he loved his reputation or his business empire. I would have traded everything for a parent who looked at me the way you look at Tommy." The confession hung between them, vulnerable and honest. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a small easing of the anger he'd been carrying for so long. "What happened with your family?" he asked. "After you left?" Victoria's laugh was bitter. "I did exactly what they wanted. Finished school, got my MBA, started working in finance, married the man they approved of. Old money, right connections, perfect on paper. We divorced 3 years later because he was sleeping with his secretary, and I realized I'd become everything I'd sworn I'd never be. Then I took my share of the settlement, invested it, built my own wealth management firm, made more money than my father ever dreamed of. And you know what? None of it filled the space you left." Marcus didn't know what to say to that. The vulnerability in her voice was so at odds with the polished, successful woman who'd opened the door to him a week ago. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me," Victoria continued. "I made my choices, and I have to live with them. But I want you to know that walking away from you was the biggest mistake of my life, and not because of what you could have been or what we could have had, but because I let fear and other people's expectations stop me from choosing the person who made me genuinely happy." "We were kids," Marcus said quietly. "Maybe it wouldn't have worked out anyway. Maybe." She smiled sadly. "But we deserve the chance to find out." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. and Marcus realized with some surprise that the anger he'd been carrying was fading, replaced by something more complicated. Understanding, maybe, or just the weariness of holding on to hurt for so long. The days turned into weeks, and a rhythm developed. Marcus worked the grounds and found himself taking on additional projects, building a small playground for Tommy, starting a vegetable garden, repairing and refinishing an old gazebo. Victoria stopped maintaining the careful distance. She'd invite them for dinner or bring breakfast over to the guest house on weekend mornings. She read stories to Tommy before bed, taught him to identify birds in the garden, laughed at his endless questions about everything. And slowly, carefully, she and Marcus began to talk, really talk, about the years they'd spent apart, the lives they'd built, the regrets they carried, about books and movies and politics and philosophy, about what it meant to be a good person in a complicated world. They debated and laughed and sometimes argued, and Marcus realized with a jolt that he'd missed this, missed intellectual companionship, missed having someone to share ideas with beyond just the logistics of survival. One evening, about 3 weeks into their arrangement, Victoria found Marcus in the garden at sunset. He was kneeling by the tomato plants, his hands in the dirt, and there was something peaceful about the scene that made her stop and just watch for a moment. "You look happy," she said softly. Marcus looked up, and there was dirt on his face and contentment in his eyes. "I am," he admitted. "Is that strange, given everything?" "Not strange at all." She sat down on the grass beside him, not caring that she was wearing expensive slacks. "You know what I realized, watching you these past few weeks?" "What?" "That you never let your circumstances define you. You've been dealt some really terrible hands, Marcus, but you stayed kind. You stayed gentle. You stayed focused on what matters. Being a good father, being a good person. That takes real strength." Marcus was quiet for a moment, his hands still in the dirt. "You want to know the truth? Some days I'm so tired I can barely stand. Some nights I lie awake and panic about the future, about all the ways I might fail Tommy. I'm not strong, Victoria. I'm just stubborn. I don't know how to quit. That's what strength is," she said softly. "It's not about never being afraid or tired. It's about keeping going anyway." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them. An understanding, a recognition. The girl he'd fallen in love with 15 years ago was still there, underneath the success and the polish. And maybe, just maybe, the boy she'd fallen for was still there too, underneath the weariness and the struggle. "I need to tell you something," Victoria said, and her voice was nervous. "The month is almost up. You'll have to decide whether to stay or find something else. But before you decide, I want you to know that I'd like you to stay. Not as an employee, not out of guilt or obligation, but because having you and Tommy here has reminded me what it feels like to have a family. You've brought life to this place. You've brought life to me." Marcus's heart was pounding. "Victoria, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give," she said quickly. "I know I hurt you. I know trust doesn't just magically reappear. But I'm asking for a chance to prove that I'm not that scared 21-year-old anymore. I'm asking if maybe, possibly, we could see if there's still something here worth exploring." The answer should have been no. Should have been about protecting himself, about not risking his heart or Tommy's stability on someone who'd already left once. But Marcus found himself thinking about the way Victoria sang to Tommy when he had nightmares, about the sound of her laugh when they debated over dinner, about how natural it felt to have her in his life again. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I'm scared of getting hurt again. I'm scared of letting Tommy get attached and then losing you. I'm scared that this is all some kind of dream that I'll wake up from." "I'm scared too." Victoria's eyes were bright with tears. "I'm terrified of messing this up again. But Marcus, I've spent 15 years being safe, playing it careful, building a life that looks perfect on the outside but feels empty on the inside. I don't want to be safe anymore. I want to be brave. And being brave means taking a chance on something real, even if it's risky." Marcus looked at her, at this successful, brilliant woman who was choosing him, who was choosing them, and felt something crack open in his chest. Not the old hurt, but something new. Hope, maybe. or possibility. Tommy comes first, he said firmly. Always. If this goes south, if you change your mind, he can't be the one who pays the price. I would never hurt him. Victoria's voice was fierce. And I would never hurt you again. I swear it, Marcus. I swear on everything I have. He believed her. Against all logic and past experience, he believed her. And maybe that was foolish. Maybe it was naive. But it also felt like the most honest thing he'd done in years. Then yes, he said quietly. Let's try. Let's see what this could be. Victoria's face transformed, joy breaking across it like sunrise. She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and when he didn't, she took his hand. Her fingers were soft against his calloused ones, and the touch sent electricity up his arm. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for giving me another chance. They sat there in the garden as the sun set, hands intertwined, and Marcus felt the weight he'd been carrying for so long begin to lift. Not all of it. Healing would take time, but enough that he could breathe a little easier, hope a little bigger. The next 6 months were a revelation. Victoria was true to her word, patient and present and committed. She didn't push, didn't demand more than Marcus was ready to give. Instead, she showed up, every day. For the small moments and the big ones, for Tommy's kindergarten play and Marcus's bad days, for Sunday morning pancakes and late-night conversations on the terrace. She helped Marcus start a small landscaping business, using her connections to get him clients and her business sense to help him set up properly. Within 3 months, he had more work than he could handle and had hired an assistant. The success was dizzying, but Victoria kept him grounded, reminded him that he'd had the skills and the work ethic all along. He'd just needed a chance. Tommy blossomed. He started calling Victoria Miss V, and then one day, shyly, Mama V. The first time it happened, Victoria had cried, and Marcus had held her while she whispered that she didn't deserve this, didn't deserve them. He'd told her that love wasn't about deserving. It was about choosing, every day, to show up. There were hard moments, too. Times when Marcus's insecurity flared up, when he couldn't believe this was real, when he waited for Victoria to realize she'd made a mistake. Times when Victoria's old fears resurfaced, when she panicked that she wasn't good enough, that she didn't know how to be a partner or a parent figure. They worked through it, with patience and honesty, and sometimes the help of a couples counselor who helped them navigate the complicated terrain of second chances. And slowly, carefully, Marcus let himself fall in love again. Not with the memory of who Victoria had been, but with who she was now, strong and vulnerable, successful and seeking, someone who'd learned from her mistakes and was actively working to be better every day. On a spring evening, almost a year after Marcus had knocked on Victoria's door desperate and out of options, she asked him to marry her. They were in the garden, their garden now, the place where they'd had so many conversations and breakthroughs. Tommy was playing nearby, chasing fireflies with a jar, his laughter bright in the growing darkness. Victoria took Marcus's hand and dropped to one knee, and the reversal of traditional roles made him smile, even as his eyes filled with tears. Marcus Webb, she said, and her voice was steady and sure. You are the bravest, kindest, most remarkable person I've ever known. You taught me what real strength looks like. You taught me what unconditional love means. You and Tommy have made my house a home, and I can't imagine my life without you in it. Will you marry me? The ring she held out was simple and perfect, not flashy or expensive, just a band of gold that caught the last rays of sunset. Marcus looked at it, then at her, then at Tommy laughing in the twilight, and felt his heart overflow with gratitude and love and the sheer impossible wonder of this second chance. Yes, he said, and then louder for Tommy to hear, yes. Tommy's shriek of excitement could probably be heard 3 blocks away. He ran over, and they wrapped him up in their arms, the 3 of them holding each other while the fireflies danced around them like tiny stars fallen to earth. The wedding was small, just a few close friends, Tommy as ring-bearer, and a justice of the peace who cried through the whole ceremony. Victoria wore a simple dress, Marcus a suit that actually fit, and Tommy wore a tiny tuxedo that made him look impossibly grown up. They said their vows under the gazebo Marcus had restored, in the garden they'd built together, surrounded by the beauty they'd created from broken pieces. "I promise to choose you," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "Every day, in the small moments and the big ones. I promise to trust you with my heart and my son's heart. I promise to remember that love is not about perfection, but about showing up. I promise to be brave enough to believe in us." Victoria's vows were equally simple and profound. "I promise to honor the second chance you've given me. I promise to never let fear make my decisions. I promise to be the partner and parent figure you and Tommy deserve. I promise to build a life with you that's based on honesty and respect and genuine love. And I promise that whatever comes, we'll face it together." When they kissed, Tommy cheered, and the small gathering laughed and cried, and Marcus felt a completeness he'd never experienced before. Not because Victoria completed him, he'd been whole all along, even in his struggles, but because together, they were building something bigger than either of them could be alone. Years passed. Marcus's landscaping business grew into a successful company that employed a dozen people, many of them folks who'd faced similar struggles to his. He never forgot where he'd come from, and he made it his mission to offer the kind of chance Victoria had given him. Victoria continued her wealth management firm, but shifted her focus to financial literacy programs for underprivileged communities. Together, they established a foundation that provided housing assistance, job training, and support for single parents facing homelessness. Tommy grew into a confident, compassionate teenager who knew his own story, knew about the hard times, the car his dad had been willing to sleep in to keep him fed, the second chance that had changed everything. He was proud of his father, proud of his family, proud of the journey that had brought them together. On the 10-year anniversary of that day, Marcus had knocked on Victoria's door. They stood together in the garden, now expanded and even more beautiful, a testament to years of care and love. Tommy was 15 now, tall and thoughtful, already talking about college and his dreams of becoming a social worker. Victoria's hair had threads of silver now, and Marcus's face bore the lines of a life well lived rather than a life worn down. "You know what I think about sometimes," Victoria said, leaning against Marcus as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. "What if you'd walked away that day? What if you'd been too proud to accept help? Or what if I'd been too scared to open the door?" Marcus squeezed her hand. "But I didn't, and you weren't. That's what matters. Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Those 15 years we lost?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "I used to. But those years made us who we are. You needed to find your strength. I needed to learn mine. And Tommy..." His voice caught. "Tommy wouldn't exist if things had gone differently. So no, I don't regret it. I'm grateful for all of it, even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts." Tommy joined them then, slinging an arm around each of his parents. He was taller than Marcus now, but he still hugged his dad with the same fierce love he'd had as a 5-year-old with a stuffed elephant. "Dad," Tommy said, "I've been thinking about that story you told me, about how you offered to mow lawns for food, and that's how you found Mom again. What about it, buddy? I want to write about it for my college essay, about second chances and courage, and how the worst moments can become the best ones if you don't give up. Is that okay?" Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. "More than okay. I'm honored. You should mention the part where your dad taught me that real wealth isn't about money," Victoria added softly. "It's about the people you love and the life you build together." Tommy grinned. "Already in there. Mr. Harper says it might be too sentimental, but I don't care. It's the truth." They stood there together as darkness fell and the first stars emerged. This family that had been built from broken pieces, from mistakes and redemption, from a desperate knock on a door and the courage to answer it. The mansion around them was no longer a symbol of wealth and isolation, but a home filled with laughter and love and the daily small acts of choosing each other. Marcus thought about that morning 10 years ago, the fear and desperation, the shame of having to ask for food, the shock of seeing Victoria again. He thought about all the doors that had closed in his face, all the people who'd looked right through him. And he thought about how close he'd come to never knocking on this particular door, to letting pride drive him away from the second chance he'd needed so badly. Life had a funny way of bringing you full circle, he realized. But it wasn't really a circle. It was a spiral, bringing you back to similar places but at a higher level, with more wisdom and depth. He'd stood at Victoria's door as a desperate man with nothing to offer but his willingness to work. Now he stood in their home as a successful business owner, a husband, a father, a man who'd learned that asking for help wasn't weakness but wisdom, and that accepting grace didn't diminish you, it transformed you. The garden around them rustled in the evening breeze, and Marcus could smell the tomatoes ripening on the vine, the roses Victoria had planted, the herbs Tommy had started growing for his cooking experiments. Every plant, every flower, every carefully tended corner was a testament to what you could build when you were given good soil and someone who believed in you. "I love you both," Marcus said quietly, pulling his family closer. "Thank you for being my second chance." "Thank you for being ours," Victoria whispered back. And Tommy, wise beyond his years, just held them both and said nothing. Because sometimes love was beyond words. The stars wheeled overhead, infinite and constant, and in that garden built from grace and second chances, a family stood together and faced the future without fear. Because they'd learned the most important lesson of all, that the worst moments don't define you, how you rise from them does. That love isn't about perfection, but about showing up even when it's hard. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to try anyway. And that sometimes when you're brave enough to knock on a door asking for help, what you find on the other side isn't just food for a day or a temporary solution. What you find is home. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. What part of Marcus and Victoria's journey resonated with you the most? Was it the moment Marcus had to swallow his pride and ask for help? The vulnerability of Victoria's confession about her past mistakes? Or maybe the beautiful way Tommy brought light to both of their lives? Your thoughts and feelings matter so much to us. They remind us why we tell these stories, why we believe in second chances and the power of choosing love over fear. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about the chances you've taken or the ones you're afraid to take, please hit that like button. Your support helps us continue creating these deeply human stories about struggle and redemption, about ordinary people finding extraordinary courage in the hardest moments. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late for a second chance, that asking for help is a strength, not a weakness, and that the worst day of your life might just be the doorway to your greatest blessing. Thank you for being here, for opening your heart to Marcus and Victoria's story, and for believing, as we do, that love and grace and second chances are some of the most powerful forces in the world. We'll see you in the next story, and until then, remember, keep knocking on doors, keep believing in possibilities, and never let anyone convince you that your circumstances define your worth.